What's going on, everybody? What's happening? It's Saturday. I'm not sure who's available right now because we have got 89, 90-degree weather just about here by the beach in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm not expecting a lot of folks to be around today. The weather is the same anyplace else on the East Coast or the United States, but as always, still here, we're going to go ahead and get the damn thing done. All right, so sit back and roll in, folks. Get it on. Rather than sit around and wait, let's go ahead and get started here. All right, so welcome to a value conversation, GenX spoken word. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what we've got going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do, and subscribe if this is what you're looking for. All right, so topic of today's show: FBA has no claims to reparations. You're going to hear me say this many more times, either in this particular episode or in others to follow, because that's just the fact of the matter here. There is no way that I can see personally, this is me speaking from John's perspective, anyone who does not claim to be of African descent, nor show any support for other Africans, and disparage other Africans, expecting any type of reparation. What's the basis of you requiring reparations? Well, we can trace our lineage back to slavery. So can a majority of folks who do not support FBA ideology. But I've got something for you, for anyone who's tuning in who's actually FBA. I've got information, as always, that none of you are familiar with because it's not taught, because no one in your circle who keeps you caught up with lies and false declarations of lineage, they're not going to speak of this. They're going to continue to play this grassroots thing online, talk about all the numbers and how FBA is respected and how it's being acknowledged. Yes, we're acknowledging idiocy. We're acknowledging divisiveness. We're acknowledging the separation that is seen between blacks inside of the same culture, should I say from the same culture, with the same heritage, from the same continent. You're not going to get 100 before 99. You're not going to get 5 before 1. You're not going to have the child exist before its mother. But yet, for whatever reason, FBA believes that outside of just reality, that they exist without any affiliation with Africa. Because, well, I'm from America. We were born in America. Our history begins in America. Our history did not begin with slavery, but we're going to go ahead and discuss that. We're going to go ahead and get into this as we always do. Now, before that, hold on for a second. I just want to make sure the music isn't too loud because it looks like this might be a solo show, and I might be talking to folks who are watching this on the replay, which is fine. As I always say, there's a lot of hours that needs to get done over here. So whether I have anyone who shows up or if anyone watches this during the course of the replay, the information is still going to be heard. So as I said, I'm going to become accustomed to doing at the very beginning of the show. I'm going to want everyone to put up their circles. Now, again, the purpose of this circle is folks to recognize that whatever it is that they believe in, that they believe they know, and I use believe sparingly because belief is nothing more than unsubstantiated thought. But for whatever it is that people call to be their belief system, I want you to focus on the circle. If you're watching me, put your hands up like this and repeat after me. Inside this circle exists my anecdotal, lived experiences and exposure I base my life on. Just because Jon says something I don't agree with doesn't mean that I'm an idiot or Jon is a liar. It simply means I am unfamiliar with what's being discussed. Now, anytime we start getting into a conversation or someplace here, there's a discussion that you're not comfortable with, go ahead and put your circle up. I may be talking about something that you've never heard of, that you've never been exposed to. This might be the very first time. If that's the case, don't look at me as being a liar. Look at me as providing you some information that you have never known. Take that, put that against whatever it is that you currently know or believe. Once again, I say very carefully believe whatever it is you believe that you know. Look for yourself, or if you need to, you can always give me a shout. It's not like I'm hiding from anybody. Matter of fact, let me do this again. Let me give you my current email address so I get my domain piece back up again. All right, that is my email address. Feel free to send me an email if you want to have a discussion about what it is that I presented, the information I have, how I found it. And then on another note, if it's an issue of mental health, give me an email. Again, I can have this conversation with you. Although, again, I have not finished my studies to where I can be licensed, but I am more in the vein of having the ability to have this conversation, being that psychology is my primary background outside of information technology. I've got over 10 years and still counting, to include also studies currently working towards the doctorate level, hopefully to finish the next 2 years or so if everything works out all right. So I can have that conversation with you about your life and certain things, but at any point in time, if there's something that I feel that might be past common or just basic discussion that requires you to talk to someone who is fully licensed, that is something that I will point towards. But up until that, I am only here to provide answers if I have them, and if I don't, we can look for them together, or I can look and then tune you on to what I come back with, all right? So let's get away from that and get started here, because I want to get out and get some of the sunshine like everybody else. So what's cracking in the news right about now? So being that the topic is reparations, let's see what happens when the reparations are misused. So if you're not familiar, folks, a judge just blocked Donald Trump's raggedy ass slush fund. Now the number says 1.7 billion, but he specifically, or should I say the administration specifically, made it 1.776 billion. That's a reflection of the 1776 bill that they were trying to run when the 1619 project first kicked off back in 2018, 2019. Sure enough, based upon it being a Republican government back then, that project was killed. But the 1776 project, I believe, had a little bit of life before it went to the wayside as well. But the whole purpose of this slush fund here is to award damages to the people who attacked the United States on January 6, 2020. Excuse me, 2021. So we're actively looking at the misappropriation and the misuse of what reparations was intended for. Anyone can put together some type of dogma and attempt to bring legitimacy to it. But when you have something as blatant as January 6th, how do you even justify this? You justify it by being in control of the House, the Senate, and the Congress, and having no one willing to say anything because they're too feckless and craven. But as I said before, eventually the judiciary is going to get involved. Side note, I've got my braces on, so if I mispronounce a few words and I have to get it out a couple of times, that's because of Invisalign. Good investment, by the way. All right, enough of the filthy plug. Getting back to this. Look at this. Reparations now. Reparations for what? Trump made the statement, oh, this money is for the people who were wrongfully harmed by the Biden Department of Justice. Biden didn't control the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice under the Biden presidency was probably the last time in the near future that we saw an independent agency that did not kowtow to the president. So what we're watching now, again, is the misappropriation of the term reparations. Bigoted, insurrectionist racists are on the verge of being paid out, or at least they thought they were. Luckily enough, again, the judiciary stepped in to do the right thing, so it's blocked for the time being. I'm not going to make this dude the main part of the show, but I just wanted to make sure that reparations is kicked around real casually. Now, if that wasn't foolish enough here, luckily we had someone else, again, the judiciary stepped in to stop more foolery by going back and looking at the IRS settlement that led to this weaponization fund, supposedly of $1.776 billion to be awarded to insurrectionists. Now, I can't think in my, so I'll be 56 next month, so we'll cut it down. We'll say in my 40, we'll say 30, 35 years of being aware of certain aspects of government, listening to my parents and grown folks speak back throughout the mid 80s and through the 90s once I became an adult and living on my own, I can't think of any time that I've seen the government in such disarray. This is even before I was paying attention to it. How difficult is it to discuss the topic of reparations? Now, as a kid, we all knew that blacks were wrongfully enchained, disenfranchised, but we didn't know words like disenfranchised. We just knew slaves. That's what blacks were. Again, that time of year in the spring, once you finished talking about how the Pilgrims came to America, the Revolutionary War, all that, when you got past that, we always knew there was going to be that point where we had to talk about slavery. And anyone who's followed me has heard me say this numerous times. That's the part of the year where all the white kids love to come up with slave jokes. If anything, always having something to do with slaves come up in a conversation. If it wasn't about slavery, they would try to find a way to make it slavery. I think I mentioned one time that I was sitting in class one day and some kid said, "Hey, John, come here, I got to show you something." And he held up a piece of paper, like, "What's that supposed to be?" And it was a square that was supposed to be a mirror with what was construed to be a slave with a chain around his neck. He said, "Oh, that's you." Now, I was still someone who was restrained a lot, even as a kid. I recognized that somebody else's ignorance didn't mean I had to act like a fool. Now, depending upon your upbringing, yes, some folks throw hands. I chose not to throw hands in that instance only because I didn't really need to. But when I stop and think about it, I still shot the shit out of it. But then again, I was raised inside a military environment. And this was inside of a school system that was outside of the military environment. So now I'm going to school with civilian kids. Their parents aren't called if you're acting up and told to come pick them up. And then, of course, if it happens enough times, then, of course, they call your organization. The first sergeant gets involved. And then, if it persists, the kid's behavior, then the squad commander gets involved and all that type of nonsense. That's not what happens in civilian school. These kids just act up, say whatever they want, do whatever they want. And the teachers might give a shit. Different time period. But what I'm saying is that when it came down to the time period of having to go through Black history, you were going to get that type of bigotry and that type of racism. Kids learn it somewhere, right? The behavior that you see exposed was always from someone who made sure it was ingrained. Keep that in mind. Anyway, so again, as I said before, we're looking at the IRS portion, that settlement that's been reopened so they can examine how in the hell this happened. And the judge has said that there was deception that was put on her court in order to allow this to take place, whereas now a deal was reached, but out of that deal, hey, we're going to go ahead and give all this money in a settlement to the folks from January 6th who were held, or should I say properly imprisoned. And these folks are looking at a payout. They're all going to become millionaires, damn near. So let's make sure that you support the judiciary. Make sure you make it known that they're not going, they being the right-wing conservatives, the far-right extremists, are not going to bastardize the progress we have. But that's a different show. All right? Vote, vote, vote. So let's get into the meat and topics of it. So here's the question that I asked. Are reparations intended for descendants of enslaved Africans? Now, before I go any further, again, FBA does not consider themselves to be affiliated with Africa. Although, if it were not for Africans being enslaved and brought to America, they wouldn't be here. None of us would be here. But that's not a consideration, or should I say that is not something rational that is given. Instead, you got this made up concept about, we have a lineage, or this type of nonsense, this declaration of BS that is spewed each and every time when the question is asked, so how did you get here? Who do you identify with? We'll cut it off right there and we'll get back into it, because I'm looking at running this for about maybe an hour, no more than an hour and a half. Let's try and stay within that window. Yes, in the United States, the core movement for reparations is fundamentally intended for the Black descendants of enslaved Africans. So question, if you do not consider yourself African descendant, how would you even put yourself in a position? Shape your mouth to say that reparations are only intended for foundational Black Americans or people who can trace their lineage back to slavery. Here's the funny thing. There are people who are not even in this country who can trace their lineage to slavery in this country. But the problem with the FBA is that they believe that this is a monopoly, or lineage, as they call it, this nonsensical system here. What I'm tired of just talking about this. Let me go ahead and bring this up here. All right, so this is a definition that I've thought about and I have fashioned. And I want to make sure everybody else sees this, all right? So when I hear FBA talk about lineage, this is what I think of it being a performative false premise declaration. So what was it that I thought about this and I fashioned together? An authoritative statement or decree that is presented as reality by the speaker, which is primarily Tariq Nasheed, despite being based on an intentionally untrue or incorrect foundation. It is designed to manipulate perception, set ground rules, or force compliance by treating a falsehood, for example, FBA ideology and lineage, as an established fact. So go ahead and soak that in, folks. I've got a couple more that I'm going to lay on everybody. It's nothing more than performance. We are a lineage. You are nothing. You are an example of what happens when people misappropriate the actual culture that you strive to be, that you strive to emulate, that you're nothing like. FBA has no history. They have no culture. They have no legacy. They have nothing more than the wishes to portray the type of prominence that African Americans with distinction have already shown, has been recorded in history. There's nothing that you're going to hear from FBA that's going to be of any type of originality of sorts. Not a damn thing. Imagine someone going to a buffet, right, and picking out exactly the best things of what's there to offer. But I want to take certain things. I'll take the adversity that was overcome. I'll take the struggle. I'll take some of this perseverance. And then you create this ideology and then say, yes, the ancestors would support what I'm doing. Of course they would, because if you take some of the best aspects of what that culture had to give, you're going to find people who say, yes, I will support this. But then when you get into the foolery overall, no one is going to stand side by side with what you stand for. So yes, the adversity, the struggle, being able to persevere through it all. Yes, that is everything that a Martin Luther King, that a Malcolm X, that a Sojourner Truth, a W.E. Du Bois, or Du Bois, I've heard it both ways. These are things that they would look for and agree with. But the overarching ideology of disparaging other blacks in the diaspora, that would be a no-go and a hard stop. But FBA doesn't think about that. We'll get to that shortly. The goal is to compensate for centuries of chattel slavery and the enduring economic, social, and political disadvantage that follows. While the overarching intention is focused on this group, there are varying perspectives of how eligibility should be defined and applied. Now, this is that crazy part that gets me about FBA. FBA is like a juvenile delinquent that comes into the room, runs in front of everybody, and thinks they're going to sit at the head of the table with no experience had or prominence shown. You're just going to come up within the last 20, 30 years or so at best, I'm being generous, and plop your ass down and attempt to make the rules and directions about who does and does not qualify. Doesn't work like that. Don't even get into consideration, folks. FBA doesn't determine who is what or gets access to what. Strict lineage. Many prominent advocates and organizations such as the NAACP and the National African American Reparations Commission argue that reparations should be strictly targeted to individuals who can trace their lineage back to enslaved African Americans. Boom, right there, that opens up the door to what I want to hit you guys with in a little bit. Because I promise you, unless you've been keeping up with my show in the last couple of months, many of you are not familiar with folks, who walk amongst us, who have the most legitimate and unarguable reason to be considered for reparations. And this is going to throw a whole bunch of you when I say this. There's even a Netflix special, I believe that's out, that talked about these folks. A broader race-based approach. Others propose that reparations should be available to all Black or African American people in the U.S. regardless of direct documented lineage to an enslaved ancestor, citing that systemic racism and the legacy of slavery have negatively impacted all Black Americans. All right, there is also another good point. It is a wide open field here. So when FBA jumped in and says, okay, we're just going to shut everybody else out because no one experienced it the way that folks who grew up in slavery or the ancestors who came up in slavery, no one experienced it the way they did. And we are descendant from those folks. So therefore, if you cannot trace your lineage back to slavery, well, you shouldn't be getting any part of the conversation of reparations. But here's the problem, folks. Let me just go ahead and let this little bit out right now. What if, now think about this, what if for every year of slavery that persisted inside the United States, 240 years plus. And people are thinking that it was just American born African American descendants who endured slavery. What if for every year of slavery, there were full-blooded Africans who were working in the fields side by side, shoulder to shoulder with American-born slaves? Now think about this. How would that affect the conversation when reparations is discussed? Again, think about this. When we talk about reparations, the concept or the idea has been always that it has been African Americans or African Americans who are descendants of enslaved Africans who are entitled to reparations. But what if full-blooded Africans were there every year of slavery, all 240 some odd years of slavery, up until the beginning of the Civil War? What if there were full-blooded Africans who were in the fields? Would they not be entitled to slavery? Or should I say, would their ancestors, their descendants, not be entitled to reparations? Yeah. Think about this. If, I'm just spitballing here, if Mufasa was able to say that I had this descendant or this ancestor, the story is that Umbuku went out to go fishing one day and he never came back. They found his rod and reel out there and footprints. The sand was all kicked up there to struggle. And, he was gone. And then 200 or 300 or 700, 800 years later, I don't know. Call it what you want. We'll say, but 300 or 400 years later, somehow there's a connection made that this ancestor of theirs was found to have been on a plantation in Georgia. And this ancestor wrote of how he came from a particular village back in Africa, wrote down the names of the people that were in his family. And it happens to be that the individual we're talking about here is from that family. If that connection were made, does that not mean, based on the definition that we read here, this individual would be entitled to reparations? I think it would. But again, you'd have people who would argue it. But that is a clear-cut case of how anyone who is a descendant of these pure-blood Africans who were in the fields with American-born slaves would have access to reparations. That's something I'm going to put out there, and we may expand on that if I can get a panel together. But we'll mark that down and keep that in mind. Systemic and community. Some local initiatives, such as programs in Evanston, Illinois, or California state task force proposals, have focused on broader community investments. Like housing grants, business opportunities, and educational support aimed at addressing the ongoing harms of redlining, racial terror, and economic disenfranchisement within specific Black communities. Now, the thing here that made it so easy for the Trump administration to be so brash and have the set of balls they did to even suggest this fund is because it is finite. It's not ranging over centuries. It's a group of people held for about a minimum of 12 to 14 months, as they should have been, and should have faced trial for their treachery, insurrection, and trying to overthrow the government. These folks should have been in jail. But as a result of the administration changing all the rules, bastardizing democracy, these folks are now in a position to receive a payout. That's not what reparations is for, not what it should be based for. And you can clearly see the hypocrisy, the bigotry, and the racism in this. So it's already bad enough that we cannot get reparations to be properly addressed on the floor of the House or the Senate, but yet you can have insurrectionists who beat police with poles, sprayed bear spray with their bare hands, attack them, and then all of a sudden they're looking at a payout of $1.776 billion. Moving on. So I was just talking about a gotcha moment, right? About a what if. So the what if I'm referring to, as I did in the last show, and we're going to hear me talk a lot about this, is saltwater Africans. Again, these are pure blood Africans who were in the slave fields, on the plantations, shoulder to shoulder with American-born slaves after a certain amount of time. Eventually, you got the first and second generation who, after succumbing through violence, more or less manipulation, pretty much the same thing that was endured by their ancestors before they were brought over in ships, but going through that breaking period. And that breaking period also required this fictional character named Jesus to be ingratiated into their lives. Well, we'll say integrated, but more or less it was meshed. What's better than ensuring that your workers worship the same God you do in order to ensure compliance? So want you to keep that in mind, all right? Keep that in mind. If it doesn't come up again in this show, I'll make sure that I'll make reference to it in another. So again, Foundation of Black American supporters are unaware the transatlantic slave trade imported saltwater Africans right up until the American Civil War. The illegal importation of enslaved Africans persisted in the U.S. until the onset of the Civil War. Although the U.S. banned the international slave trade in 1808 and later classified it as piracy, demand for enslaved labor led smugglers to continue bringing saltwater Africans into the country right up to 1860. So again, we're talking about the time, or from the time the transatlantic slave trade started up until 1860. We're talking about 200, damn close to 200 plus years. We are talking every year of slavery having full-blooded Africans standing on American soil out in the fields, catching bullwhips, catching hands, or whatever, just the violence that was to be expected of enslaved Africans and enslaved African Americans who are descendants of those same Africans. They all endured the same trauma and horrors. Key facts here. The last slave ships. The Wanderer successfully smuggled over 400 African captives into Georgia in 1858. The most famous final ship was the Flotilla, which I've mentioned in a few shows here already, which arrived in Mobile, Alabama in July 1860. Specific date, July 9th, 1860, and they were carrying 110 Africans. The enslavers deliberately burned and sank the flotilla to hide the illegal voyage, establishing a community known as Africatown. Now, as I said in the previous show, I'm trying to get in contact with folks from Africatown to see if they'd be willing to either do a tape show or do a live show to discuss their experiences being direct descendants of Africans, or at least being able to trace it directly to them. We have folks who can say, well, what's your lineage? Who do you trace? It's not this thing that you see of, well, going back through Ancestry.com or something like that. These are people who can point directly at that boat, which will then take everything directly back to Africa. We're talking about a pipeline that these people in Africatown are. While the internal domestic slave trade was the primary source of enslaved labor, historians estimate that thousands of captive Africans were illegally smuggled into the Gulf Coast states, Florida and Texas, in the decades leading up to the Civil War. So think about this. When Prohibition first kicked off and you couldn't sell liquor openly anymore, what happened? The sale of liquor went underground. So as I've said in previous shows, the sale of Africans was prominent. There was money in this. There was so much money that the clergy was also involved in this, in the selling. To which I say to folks, and Christians may get a little bit, get a case of ass with me about this, but still, why do you sit here and persist on praising a tool of your oppression? Slavery was business. Slavery was cash profit. So if I were to look at Jesus as being the CEO of this whole thing, again, the fictional individual, Jesus would have been seen as your captor, your enslaver, and your oppressor. Again, the CEO of the whole operation. Fictional Jesus was not there to take you or guide you to freedom. His whole role was to make you content with where you were in life, to accept your lot for the most part. And because you were not going anywhere in life, it was best just to accept where you were and understand that your master loved you. And in turn, you should love him. The middle passage. Captives arriving right before the Civil War endured the brutal middle passage just as earlier generations did, facing harrowing conditions of forced separation from their African cultures and communities. Now imagine being one of these full-blooded Africans showing up in 1860 America. I mean, granted, you're seeing people who look like you, but do not sound like you, nor treat you as you are the same. Now, as I've said in previous shows, as the generations started passing, where you had the first Africans who arrived after, let's say, if they did, which most likely went through a breaking process down in the southern colonies, we're talking in the Caribbean or possibly in Brazil, South America. But nonetheless, once they got to America, having been down in the southern colonies, I would guess there was a lot of folks, Africans that spoke Spanish, that probably had to learn English. Who knows? Maybe they were being taught English while they were still there. But nonetheless, any African that hit the coastline of America had to learn English. Why? Because in order to learn about how Jesus cared for you, Jesus loved you, and all this, you got to be able to understand what's being said. Now, when you talk about Africans being taken from their native home, kidnapped, stolen, however you want to put it, people are quick to say, oh, well, they just took slaves. They were already enslaved. I've had multiple conversations about how slavery worked in Africa within an indentured system. It was nothing like the chattel slavery that we see or have seen and have read about over our lifetime. If there was a war with another tribe or nation or whatnot, the victors took losers in as prisoners. And from that point, there was a period of indentured servitude. 17 years where this person who's taken captive will work, and they will more or less work towards their freedom. And during the course of this time, while they're working towards their freedom, they can become members of that particular family who they were enslaved to. They may have some type of business about town that they were part of. Heck, even end up having a hand in marriage of the daughter, if it's a male, of who was or whoever it was that had them working that indentured slavery for a period of 17 years. And at the end of that indentured slavery, you could either go back to your tribe that still existed, or you could stay where you were and become a part of that tribe or clan, however you want to call it, family, you name it. But you could stay and be a part of it. That's the type of slavery that existed before colonization. So if anyone were to ask me, well, they stole slaves from Africa. No, they did not take slaves. They took doctors, they took scientists, they took architects, they took teachers. All right? That's what was taken from Africa. People have a tendency to say that, oh, slaves were just taken from Africa. No, they were not slaves. These were people who were engineers as well. Pyramids, one of the greatest things that you can find to have been done on the African continent. Slaves didn't do that. These were skilled laborers. But again, that's a different show, just to give an idea of who we're taking. As always, if you want to follow the flow that I'm putting down, just type in your browser what you see here, and then pursue it from there. If you have any questions, hey, I've got the email address out there. Let me know. Bobby Blanco, what's good, man? Been a minute. I'm assuming you're on your way over to Fatty's right about now, unless you're just taking a break. Yo, man, I'm doing good right about now. Just more or less doing what I do here. Just putting down the education. Yeah, man, all is good right about now. I'm actually getting ready to go home for a family reunion around the 4th of July, which is what everybody else is doing. But I'm going to try and get a couple of good shows out before then. So as I was saying here, Poppy could probably say a couple of things. Cool, man. I appreciate you dropping in for a little bit. If you have anything to add, man, just drop it in here. So what I'm doing right now, Poppy, is more or less educating people who are not familiar with saltwater Africans. Now, I'm guessing that most likely you may know about this. This year is going to be in Jackson, Tennessee. It goes to New York. It goes to here in Tennessee, Illinois, but this year is back in Tennessee, and my folks are going to be hosting. So as I was saying, saltwater Africans. Poppy, put a 1 in the chat if you are familiar with who these saltwater Africans were throughout the history of slavery, or even in Jamaica. Know about that, or even in Brazil as well. Let me know. So as I said, when I found out the existence of saltwater Africans, that got me looking. And when I found out exactly who they were and what they stood for, that told me that this FBA nonsense was completely out of the water and blown up. Again, what is that? What is that thing LeBron used to do? Boom. FBA has no claims to reparations, especially after the existence of saltwater Africans are made known. Boom. So I'm not the only one, but you don't hear this. Poppy, am I wrong? People don't discuss this enough. And of course, it is not something that is in mainstream history that you would hear about. Rarely do you have anyone speak about the existence of saltwater Africans. And again, these were pure blood Africans, as I said before, who stood shoulder to shoulder in the fields on the plantations with American-born slaves. Not a lot of people know about it. So this prompted me to put this statement in, or ask a question, or look for an answer, or even a reply. There was never an instance throughout slavery where saltwater Africans were not working on slave plantations next to American-born slaves due to the illegal slave trade. Yep, it's a small part of the history, but one of the most significant aspects. It's a small part that was never discussed that has a large impact when the discussion of reparations comes around. The statement is historically accurate. The continuous, notice, not just spotty, but the continuous presence of saltwater, meaning African-born captives, alongside American-born enslaved people is well documented. Even after the United States legally abolished the international slave trade in 1808, well, actually in between 1807 and 1808, a robust illegal smuggling pipeline continued until the Civil War. Let me do this in case any more folks show up. All right, peeps. So if you take a look at the bottom side of your screen, or it should be the right-hand side maybe, you see the comments over there, just in case I miss highlighting a few. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the context of smuggling operations. But before we do, remember I said this. I said this already, that when Prohibition happened, what was the first thing that they did? They took it underground. So if you know that you're making money from trading in illegal slaves and you're looking at your cash crop or your cash crop of Africans go up in smoke, what are you going to do? You still want to make that money. You're still going to continue doing it, but you're going to take it underground. So technically, you can say there was a black market, illegal slave trade. While the official U.S. ban took effect in 1808, illegal human trafficking persisted. Southern planters continually smuggled captives, primarily from West and Central Africa, onto U.S. soil through regions with lax enforcement. Now, I've already mentioned the Clotilda. The most famous instance of this illegal trade is the Clotilda. Now, also keep in mind, the Wanderer was the second to last boat to smuggle saltwater Africans into the U.S., which smuggled the last known cargo of captive Americans into Mobile, Alabama in 1860. The date exactly was July 9th. These survivors founded a community known as Africatown, establishing a direct link between African-born individuals and American slavery right on the eve of emancipation. You can't even sit here and take FBA serious, not that I did begin with, but even them not knowing basic history, their own history, which we all know they do not know. They have no history, they have no legacy, they have no icons unless they steal them or misappropriate them from African Americans with distinction, the ones who've established the absolute prominence on being the pillars that the back of this country, or should I say the majority of all this country, rests upon. FBA is a procurement operation. Again, we'll take a little bit of the, and the hell, pardon me. Here, folks, let me call them back. All right, so again, as I was saying, FBA will take a little bit of, we'll take some of this adversity. Think of a buffet, as I said before. I'm just bringing you guys up to speed who's happening to be coming on and checking out what's happening right about now. Imagine a buffet of African-American history, African-American prominence, and FBA walking through like, I'll take some of this adversity, here's a struggle, here's our perseverance through slavery, and here's our icons and the leadership, and taking bits and pieces of that, and then forming together this whole FBA ideology where they said, yeah, this is what our people have done to make the country what it is. We founded this, but then turn around and say, however, people that John knows, like Poppy Blanco, people like Fatty, no, we don't look at them as being black. If they come to America, no, they can't trace their lineage back to slavery. But yet, here's the thing: slavery existed globally. So if you take away this nonsense of trying to say that we have a unique heritage, you throw that out the window. And what do you have? You have the same damn experience, because anyone trying to say that, well, I experienced slavery in the Caribbean, I experienced slavery in America, I experienced slavery in Haiti. You know what? You take that supposed unique experience away and you have the same damn thing. Because I can take any one of these cats, whether it be myself, Poppy, Fatty, whoever else, and rotate us around the globe and put us somewhere where races exist. We will still be, and forgive my language, niggers to them. Because as Dr. Jon Henry Clark said, the best Pan-Africanist he ever knew was a racist, because to him, regardless of where that African person came from or a person of African descent, we were all the same. Holla at me if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Saltwater versus American born. Historians frequently document the tension and eventual integration of newly smuggled African captives, saltwater slaves, with acculturated American-born Creole enslaved people. Now, as I've said before, imagine being a brand new, dropped off the boat, snatched off your land, been on the boat for who knows, a month or two, maybe down in the Caribbean, or maybe brought straight over to the American colonies, who knows? But imagine getting there and again, seeing someone who looks like you, but doesn't talk like you, and treats you like the white Europeans do, which is with disgust. Because that's what was taught. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there were a few who were curious about these folks that looked like them, that were getting off the boats, but didn't sound like them, didn't really have actions or behaviors like them. but there was confusion. Don't get me wrong, there was actions, no doubt, that could have taken place, or most likely did take place, where someone tried to understand, who are you? Can you understand me? What do you need? What do you do? Now, again, a lot of these folks are not going to be of any use to that plantation until they learn customs. And at times, the best way to learn the customs is just to throw everybody into the same pen and let them swim or sink. Because new arrivals, I'm sorry, did I already say this? Did I read this? I think I did, but let me just go one more time just to emphasize. Because new arrivals lack knowledge of local geography and plantation routines, they were forcibly placed alongside seasoned American-born slaves who were compelled by enslavers to orient the newly arrived captives to plantation life and labor. All right, I guess I didn't mention that, but it's pretty much what I just stated, isn't it? Throw them in, hey, figure it out. Hey, Toby, get over here and make sure Jamumbu or whatever, make sure that he learns the ropes. And if he isn't learning fast enough, we all know that the sharp tongue of a bullwhip would be a motivator. Yep. All right, so let's keep cruising. So the other thing that I normally see with a lot of this FBA foolery is that they always talk about how no one in the United States is Pan-African. Pan-Africanism is dead. The only Pan-Africans that exist are in the United States, which is not true. So I asked the question, provide a list of all Pan-African conferences since the inception of Pan-Africanism. And this is what I got. The Pan-African movement's official legacy is anchored by the 9 historic Pan-African Congresses held between 1900 and 2025. These gatherings shaped global Black solidarity and drove the end of colonial rule in Africa. So here is the chronology as it speaks. I'm not going to bother reading through all of it, but I'm just going to point out the years here of existence. 1900, London, UK. 1919, Paris, France. 1921, London, UK. 23, London, UK. 27, New York. 45, Manchester. 1974, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. 94, Kampala, Uganda. And 2025, Loma, Togo. So clearly, this whole thing of Pan-African, excuse me, I said braces, Pan-Africanism is not dead. It is just another hollow talking point that you see FBA throughout here, because of the fact they can't justify the existence of the actual proponent, the precursor, the folks who are responsible for the prominence that African Americans have today in America. FBA has no history, they have no lineage, they have no culture. They are what I call Black culture vultures, all right, preying off the culture of their own to create an existence that never was. Matter of fact, let me go back and bring up the first definition that I provided. Now, going back again, I said before that FBA is nothing more than performative, false premise declaration, especially when they're talking about lineage. Again, this is what it is: an authoritative statement of decree or decree that's presented as reality by the speaker, Tariq Nasheed, despite being based on an intentionally untrue or incorrect foundation, is designed to manipulate perception, set ground rules, or force compliance by treating a falsehood, i.e. FBA, ideology, and lineage, as an established fact. But wait, there's more. Excuse me. Now, I thought of this the other day when I put this definition together. I gave thought to, again, all the times that I've gone through my chat, especially on TikTok, and seen people replying back, why is it that everyone wants to attack FBA? We just want to be left alone. All we're doing is letting people know that we have a choice to identify with who we are. And when we identify, we do not want to be cast in the same light as those blacks who are not like us, who are trying to steal our heritage. What do you mean steal your heritage? Is this not what you're doing? You're trying to steal the prominence from African Americans of this nation, folks who've already come ahead and been written down in history for their prominence and what they've done as far as contributions to African Americans. You're really trying to say that someone is stealing from you. And then this is what occurred to me, vicariously living through African Americans with distinction. Again, when I say with distinction, I'll put it this way. And I've said this numerous times. If anyone from FBA is watching, or anyone knows an FBA person or whatnot, ask them the same question that I've been asking. I've yet to get a response here. Name one FBA icon. All right, just name one who was an icon in FBA who already, or I said who has not already been identified as an African American with distinction. And when I say an African American with distinction, I'm talking about Thurgood Marshall, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Shirley Chisholm. Did I mention Malcolm X or Martin Luther King already? But nonetheless, these are people that FBA proponents continually try and say, oh, these people are foundational Black Americans. And again, why do they say that? Because they've gone out, they've taken certain aspects from the buffet of African American achievement. Again, adversity, struggle. Now, I'm not even fooling with you. Go on, KS. Kanye West. But anyway, of course, Poppy's fitting, but he gets what I'm saying. But for the most part, again, they come in, they pick and choose, they find certain things and say, yeah, these ancestors would agree with what we've got here, which we base our ideology on. Excuse me, our ideology on. However, when you get to the full aspect of that, after we get through looking at the perseverance, the struggles through adversity, the overcoming of slavery and what came through that, overcoming Jim Crow, then you have to look at, well, wait a minute. And I can imagine Malcolm X. Didn't you just say right now that you don't find yourself to be African? You look around and you say that you are not affiliated with Africa. Do you not realize that I look for people who are oppressed in the world who are African, of African descent? Can you imagine the look on Malcolm X's face, hear that people are using his legacy for an ideology that is disparaging of the people he sought to protect and wanted to see freed? So we're going to get into that in a second. I've got a slide here that addresses this, how FBA continually likes to say that these folks are foundational Black American, not realizing that based upon the body of work that came for them through their lifetime, these folks would not support FBA ideology. Again, let me bring myself back in. Vicarious misappropriation, a situation where an individual, entity, or group advances their own career, profit, or status by relying on and claiming credit for the recognized labor and intellectual contributions of peers, subordinates, or a known diaspora, i.e. the African diaspora. This action slowly erases the identities and contributions of subordinate workers, marginalized, or established groups, African diaspora, allowing the appropriator, which is FBA, to build an unearned legacy. If anybody is still watching, put a 1 in the chat. Probably that would be you. You're the only person here. But if anybody is watching this on the replay, put a 1 in the chat if you understand what I've just read regarding vicarious misappropriation. All FBA is doing is living through the actions of African Americans with distinction. They have literally self-tethered themselves to the backs of African Americans who are responsible for the prominence that we see right now, but then trying to say that, oh, well, this is the work that we did. We built this country. We found you didn't do shit. Forgive my language. FBA has no history, they have no legacy, they have no icons, but they have a consistent record of performative false pretense declarations regarding lineage, as well as showing a consistent use of vicarious misappropriation. Holla if you're picking up what I'm putting down. All right, Bobby, I see that you're down with what I'm talking about. All right, let's go ahead and keep this thing going. Yep, I had somebody try me like that in TikTok the other day after one of my posts, asked about where are you from. I told them I am African descendant by way of Tennessee. That's where I'm from. I make it known. I don't hide it. I make sure that everybody knows when I say where I'm from. Yes, I'm African American. I am descended from Africans, Africans who were enslaved in America, taken from Africa. I'm not purebred African, but I am of African descent. I know where my history is and where it comes from. And I don't have a problem telling that to anyone, white or especially black. And that's what needs to be done more often than it is right now. We don't have enough folks who are going to simply state the fact that I am an African descendant. Nope, instead you're going to get blacks. I don't know nothing about that. My folks from Detroit. I don't have anything to do with these Bigfoot Africans. I'm an American. I was born in America. I'm a foundational Black American. And as I said again, as I said before, and again, I will continue to say this, anyone who makes that statement is nothing more than living through vicarious, misappropriated conversation. Can't say it too many more times to make it known. No lies detected, right? Anyway, we have significant documentation of Pan-African conferences as well as gatherings. So, just to be fair, I asked this question: provide a list of all known Pan-African festivals celebrated globally. Because remember now, Pan-Africanism, if you hear from FBA, is dead, and the only Pan-Africans that exist are in America. Again, provide a list of all known Pan-African festivals celebrated globally. Pan-African festivals celebrate the culture, history, art, and unity of the African continent and the global Black diaspora. Major globally recognized events dedicated to Pan-Africanism span the Americas, Africa, and Europe. Now show me right here where Pan-Africanism is dead. It is only dead to those folks who do not respect it, practice it, or give it any type of thought, because they have the slave master's mindset, and it's always separate. That's what is being taught, or should I say it has been taught. I remember a statement through a lecture from Dr. Clark. He had mentioned that Malcolm said, it's the most foolish thing in the world to send your children to school to be educated by the enemy. Now, of course, he was not the only person to say that. Dr. Joseph Ben-Jochannan had made this statement as well. But what I think needs to happen now is that we need to redefine the aspect of Pan-Africanism, because again, the perspective that was held by these two men, these ancestors who have passed on, was based on what they were seeing and what they had grown up in. For those of us who've grown up, again, Generation X, born in 1970, I've seen still the racism, or the last breath of the Jim Crow era racism. I grew up 5 years after that. But we're seeing this swing around and come back again, to whereas our youth of today, our youth of color, they have no concept of Jim Crow because they have grown up without the proper knowledge being instilled in them, which is our fault, Generation X, as well as the baby boomers. We did not do a good job to ensure that the knowledge of where they came from, I'm talking about Generation Y, Generation Z, and now Gen AA, it has not been instilled. I still hear brothers talk about, well, I got this white girl I'm kicking it with. I can still go down to the movies and I can do that. So I don't know what you're talking about, that there's the issue of racism. So this is the ignorance that comes to that, because people only look at it from a step in front of them. and look at it from their direct surroundings, not considering that this is global, this is overarching. I've got an upcoming show called Holocaust is Not an Ethnicity. Now, the basis of that show is going to look at 5 actions of Holocaust, by that definition, that have occurred in the world that is rarely given any consideration about, other than when you hear the word Holocaust, you think of World War II and the people of Jewish faith who were preyed upon and almost pushed to extinction. That is who that word is associated with. But again, that's why I said the title of the show is called Holocaust is Not an Ethnicity. There were 5 Holocausts or genocides, as they can legally be qualified as per the definition, that occurred well before World War II's known association of the word Holocaust. 5. So I'm not going to list it all right now, but I will say this. No European country outside of its borders has achieved any type of success abroad without the subjugation and oppression of the local indigenous population. Put a 1 in the chat if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Put a 2 in the chat if you did not know there were 5 instances of Holocaust before World War II. All right? Put a 1 in the chat if you're understanding what I'm talking about, and put a 2 in the chat if you did not know there were 5 global Holocausts before the Holocaust known mostly because of World War II. The main reason why we don't know this is because it involved people of color. And it's this dismissiveness, it's because of this dismissiveness that we're seeing the same thing occur right now. I made a statement to someone the other day. Think about what we're seeing again with this reparation issue, where the insurrectionists are going to be given money, or hopefully they will not be given money because they're bastardizing the concept of reparations. You hear this thing of, oh, we're being discriminated against. And this is, what's the best way to put it? These white male conservatives from the manosphere. Or should I say, it's a conservative white male victimhood talking about, oh, we're being picked on, we're being discriminated against. White man, fight back. What are you fighting back against? Everything that exists right now has been put together to favor you. Majority of white males in America with education, being high school, college, and advanced, just like anyone, Black, Hispanic, Muslim, is still making more. The wage gap still exists, but yet you feel you're being oppressed. And then you bring women into it also. But yet I can look around right now and I only know of one political party that said Black history is divisive, racist, and revisionist. There's a whole lot more to go with that. But again, that's what I want folks to focus on, of the hypocrisy. So again, just to bring this back around here, we talk about reparations, we talk about slavery, we talk about genocide and Holocaust. I want you to think about this. This is the hypocrisy that I'm talking about. Again, 5 Holocausts that have occurred in history that have not gotten major attention, but maybe mentions. All right, we'll drop it right there. Let's go ahead and move along. So as it said here, Pan-Africanism is celebrated around the world. So let's look at PanFest, a major biennial cultural event held in Ghana. It draws thousands of people of African descent to Cape Coast and Elmina to honor the continent's history and healing. The Pan-African Film and Arts Film Festival, held annually in Los Angeles, California. PAF is the largest Black film and arts festival in the United States, showcasing a wide array of Black cinema and fine art from across the globe. All right, so rather than me read all this, just have a look. All right, I want to just take a look at what it is that FBA says that Pan-Africanism is not. Go ahead, drink it in. We're talking around the world. So again, if you'd like to see this same information, just put in your browser what you see right here. All right, so let's keep on moving here. So in the aspect of fairness, I said, okay, let's do the same thing. Let's do a comparison. Provide a list of all foundational Black American conferences since the inception of Foundational Black Americans. The concept of Foundational Black Americans emerged as a lineage-based designation. Now, you already heard me state what this lineage-based designation is. It's a false declaration, all right? It's performance. There is no single central FBA organization that hosts a comprehensive or continuous series of annual FBA conferences. Instead, FBA principles and history are celebrated through various grassroots community gatherings, virtual summits, and local symposiums across the United States. Now, here's where I have an issue here. FBA principles and history. As I said before, what damn history? What, a history of distortion? A history of lies, a history of falsehoods? What you have is the FBA trying to retroactively pin drop this divisive ideology right in the middle of the historical conversation of reparations. An ideology that shows nothing but disparagement to the Black diaspora. Well, we don't want anyone just coming into the country acting American, and then when things get tough, oh, I am from Ghana. Oh, I am from Nigeria. Oh no, I'm Caribbean. Now, everyone wants to pick the most extreme case. And I'm not going to say that hasn't happened. I'm not going to sit here and say this, but I'm not going to sit here and also watch African Americans pretend and act like they don't go to other countries talking about, I'm from here. My people are from here. I'm so and so. Excuse me. My people from this region. But if shit goes down, pardon my language, no, because I'm American. Yeah, I'm from Philly. I'm from Detroit. I'm from New York. This type of shit. Everyone plays that game if they're in this space. If we're talking about the diaspora wars, you have folks on all sides of the diaspora who will hint and make this type of nonsensical conversation, but that does not speak for the diaspora as a whole. That's what we've got to stop doing, letting a couple of fools supposedly be the mouthpiece for what's happening. We got to stop this mess. So as I was saying, you'll find some information that's available here, but it's not as extensive and grown out as Pan-Africanism because, in fact, it has not been around that long. It has no history. The only history that you'll hear quoted by FBA is the history that they will usurp and misappropriate for themselves from African Americans with distinction. Known African American icons, the people who are actually responsible for these achievements. That's how FBA gets their history. Various local and academic organizations host ongoing events exploring the history of enslavement and resistance in America, such as the landmark symposium at the Cambridge Public Library, featuring speakers discussing foundational Black resistance. Now, again, we can see a misuse of foundational here because this foundational Black resistance has nothing to do with foundational Black Americans at all. Zero to do with it. This has everything to do with the foundation and the prominence of the African Americans that I've spoken of. Well, there's just a few of those folks. None of them who identify as being or would be properly identified as foundational Black Americans because they do not, based upon their body of work, appear to show any signs that they would be affiliated with the divisive ideology that FBA stands for. National Black Action Conventions. While not operating exclusively under the FBA label, national civil rights institutions such as the NAACP periodically host major policy and action conventions to discuss the contemporary status and future legislative goals of Black Americans. But you have to keep in mind now, the Black Americans that are in favor of reparations concerning anyone who has been oppressed are not the same people as foundational Black Americans, who, as I said before, are the equivalent of juvenile delinquents who show up, push their way to the front of the line, and try and sit in the seat at the head of the table with no experience or prominence brought. Take the L. So then I went a little bit further also, and I asked the question, how many foundational Black American online summits have there been since inception? Oh, so it was a quick run here. It was short. There have been 2 major online events organized specifically under the foundational Black American name since the ideology's inception. The movement's core figureheads hosted the inaugural event in 2020, originally planned as a physical gathering in Atlanta that pivoted into a digital format, and a second online conference was held shortly after to organize policy and strategy. But what strategy have you seen come from being affiliated with this foundational Black assery? None. It's just a bunch of folks who show up online and they have figureheads who make a habit of disparaging the African diaspora. Now, as I said before, we have family members and we know who these people are. We know who these folks are in our family who act an ass. But even though they do, they're still family, right? Even if they speak foolishly. So it annoys me when I see FBA folks look around the globe, they look for some type of controversy where Africans are having some type of internal strife and come back and say, look at this, they can't even get themselves together. How are you going to try and tell us that we need to be together when you can't get it together? But then, of course, we look at gang violence amongst Blacks in the US. You turn on any type of record, I'm going to get this nigga, shoot that nigga, get this nigga, pull that nigga, get me, all this type of stuff. So how are you pointing your fingers over at the continent about lack of unity when we got the same exact thing going on over here? Oh, hey, yeah, there you go, Poppy, there you go, big thing. I heard something from Tariq Nasheed's ignorant ass the other day. I was watching something where the clip came on and you heard him on the show. Are you a tether, sir? Or excuse me, are you a tether, ma'am? And as we know, tether is a derogatory term to try and say that these are people who have tied themselves to the backs of the foundation of Black Americans or people who founded the country. Bullshit. Nonsense. If anything, my response would be, if I heard someone say, are you a tether, sir? No, I am an African-American descendant of enslaved Africans talking to a self-tethered mental idiot. That would be my response, because it is nothing more than menticide to sit here and accept any type of teaching from your own skinfolk who is who is disparaging the same person as they who have come from the same historical and cultural context. The exact same thing, but you're going to sit here and try and say that I'm a tether. As I've said before, FBA has self-tethered themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinction, the people who are directly responsible for the prominence that African Americans receive in this country and written in history. That leads me to a third definition, but this one is not mine. This is something that's already known. Here we go. And it's called pseudo-jingoism. All right, so what is that particularly? Pseudo-jingoism. It describes a fake or performative display of aggressive, ultra-naturalistic patriotism. It refers to individuals or groups, FBA, who adopt a fiercely belligerent or could be pro-war stance to signal loyalty or virtue, but whose extreme views lack genuine conviction, real sacrifice, or ideological consistency. All right, let me know with a 1 in the chat if you understand where I'm coming from with the definitions. Put a 2 in the chat if you don't agree with it. And if you don't agree with it, tell me why. Matter of fact, no, I've got just about another 20, 25 minutes or so. I'll even go get a link here and drop it and let you come up here and tell me why you disagree. Otherwise, recognize that everything that we see from FBA is performative. There's no consistency in it. There's no type of real online or even offline discovery of their culture. You can flick your finger faster than they can come up with nonsense and disprove any nonsense that comes out of their mouths. Jesse Jackson came up with the phrase African American. This type of ignorance. Well, we are indigenous to North America. We were here first, before slavery. We may have been in America before slavery, but you have to understand that the Africans that were here before slavery came to the North American continent as slaves from other slave colonies. As I have to tell people, don't confuse the freedmen, which were people who were freed after slavery, with the Maroons, which were slaves who escaped from slavery, made their way into coastal areas like swamps or whatnot, certain regions where the oppressors did not want to chase them, and formed their own communities. But again, the concept of the Maroons, these were Spanish-speaking Africans, still immigrants. We go down to Florida and understand that there were colonies in Florida where you had the Maroons who escaped from there. You had the Maroons in Brazil or in the Caribbean or in Haiti who escaped as well. So that's why it's the most ridiculous thing when I see FBA talking about the maroon flag. Like, you idiots, do you not realize that you are big upping the immigrants who escaped? We're talking about the enslaved Africans who escaped from their Spanish oppressors. Again, the ideology is inconsistent. But as I said here, it is short-lived if you take a look at the summits that have taken place since the inception of Foundation of Black Americans. As I said before, feel free to put in the same information and read where it comes back. All right, so let's shift gears here for a second. So this is the part that I don't think people ever stop and think about when you listen to FBA out here just ripping off, talking about, well, we have a rich and unique history. We are a lineage that is being talked about and is being recognized and respected. No one gives a shit about your lineage except you. But worse off, trying to appropriate people who would have nothing to do with you. But again, as I said, it's the African American buffet. But yeah, take a little bit of this, take a little bit of that, I'll take this and say, yeah, this is what FBA principles are founded around and based upon. And we know that Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Harriet Tubman, they will support us on this. Okay, yes, they will support those aspects that you took from what they've already founded. Yes, they will support that. But they will not support the disparagement of the African diaspora, especially if other blacks are suffering because of oppression. And then we have our own who are responsible for aiding that. The hell is wrong with you? Anyway, list the African American Foundation of Black Americans like to appropriate as icons. Foundation of Black Americans, a term for descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S., celebrate a rich legacy. Forgive my language, folks. This stuff just makes me want to just say stuff. Talk some shit, so to speak. But anyway, getting past that. Celebrate a rich legacy, please. Again, this is performance. This is self-tethering, riding the backs of others. Prominent African American figures universally revered across these communities as foundational icons and symbols of resilience, civil rights, and cultural achievement include. Again, here we go, FBA picking from the buffet of African American achievement. Dr. Martin Luther King was a founding civil rights leader who championed nonviolent resistance and racial equality. But yet everything about FBA speaks against that. Am I wrong? Harriet Tubman, a legendary abolitionist and Union scout who led dozens to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Frederick Douglass, Escaped slave became a brilliant orator, writer, and towering figure for emancipation and civil rights. Malcolm X, a transformative voice for Black empowerment, self-determination, and human rights. Right here, this is the key thing that you will hear someone from FBA talk about when you mention what icons do you have. Oh, well, we have Malcolm X. He would support us based upon Black empowerment, self-determination. Again, picking from the buffet to create something to give them legitimacy. Of course, we got Rosa Parks, Ivy Wells, James Baldwin. The list is larger than this, but I just wanted everyone to have a basic idea of the icons that FBA always likes to say that these people were foundational Black Americans. But no one ever took the time to ask the question, do you think these icons would have agreed with the ideology that you represent? Let's go ahead and find out, shall we? Is it accurate to say Malcolm X would agree with certain foundational Black American concepts, but completely discard their ideology of disparaging the Black diaspora? Shocker. It is highly accurate to say Malcolm X would align with certain foundational Black American concepts. As I said, the African American buffet, all right, picking a little bit of here, perseverance, willpower, all that type of stuff, such as Black determination, economic independence, and the urgency of addressing historical reparations. However, his evolving Pan-Africanist and internationalist worldview directly contradicts any ideology that disparages the broader Black diaspora. Make sure you're paying attention to that last part. His evolving Pan-Africanist and internationalist worldview directly contradicts any ideology that disparages the broader Black diaspora. So again, I don't need to go any further than this, all right? If you want to know why it would be, why FBA ideology is inconsistent with Malcolm X, feel free to read through it. But again, the answer that I already knew, but I wanted everybody else to see has been stated. No, Malcolm X would not support FBA at all. FBA took aspects of what he was known to be, what he was known to speak of, what he looked for, in order to say that Malcolm X would agree with us. But overall, he would not agree with the ideology that you stand for, which is, again, disparaging the Black diaspora. Boom. Malcolm X is not your icon. Next. Is it accurate to say Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would agree with certain foundational Black American concepts, but completely discard their ideology of disparaging the Black diaspora? Yes, that is an accurate historical assessment. 2 for 2. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would likely agree with the focus on economic empowerment, systemic accountability, and recognizing the distinct historical weight of American chattel slavery. However, he would strongly condemn any ideology that disparages the broader Black diaspora. I don't need to go any further, but if you wanted to, put in the information that I provided and you can read through the rest. Oh, we're not done yet. And the same thing with W.E. Du Bois, agree with certain foundational Black American concepts, but completely discard the ideology of disparaging the Black diaspora. Yes, it is highly accurate. W.E. Du Bois would strongly support the premise of recognizing the unique generations-long sacrifices and nation-building labor of Black Americans while completely rejecting any ideology that disparages the broader Black diaspora. FBA, are you recognizing this? Are you seeing what's happening? You have no icons. Let's keep it moving. All right, we know the same thing to be asked. Harriet Tubman, will she agree with certain concepts? But will she be cool with the disparaging of the Black diaspora? All right, it is historically accurate, meaning that no, she would not approve of the diaspora, although she may approve of certain concepts. Harriet Tubman's lifelong actions align with certain foundational Black American principles. Again, principles that they've gone to the buffet. Take a little bit of this, I'll take a little bit of this, I'll take some of this also from Black African American nation building skill sets and mold a little bit of something together. But overall, she would not support it. Foundation of Black American Principles, such as a fierce commitment to Black autonomy, claiming that wealth generated by Black American ancestors and insisting on civil rights. However, available historical records strongly suggest she would have completely rejected any ideology of disparaging the Black diaspora. FBA, you have no icons that supports you, although you want to call these people icons of Foundation of Black American Association. You have no history, you have no legacy, and I'm showing you right now, you have no icons. Facts. Let's keep it going. So ultimately, this is where I ended up with, but I'm sure you guys see what I'm saying here, right? FBA has no icons that will support their ignorance. None. So I typed something in similar that will pretty much provide the same answer, although maybe with a little more depth to it. No prominent African American icons, personally known philosophy, would agree with the Foundation of Black American ideology of disparaging any Black person of African descent by Foundation of Black Americans. And this is what came back from it. Foundation of Black American ideology, while meant to preserve a lineage-specific history and advocate for reparations, is widely criticized for causing division within the Black diaspora. Prominent historical icons of African descent actively promoted Pan-Africanism, international solidarity, and Black unity over division. Now, historically and philosophically, icons of African descent rejected exclusionary rhetoric. Malcolm X, an avid proponent of Pan-Africanism who, after traveling globally, heavily advocated for uniting the global African diaspora. His philosophy centered on the understanding that African Americans and Africans share the same fundamental oppressions, which I've also stated. W.E. Du Bois, a foundational scholar, civil rights pioneer, and father of Pan-Africanism, or one of the fathers, who actively worked to build intellectual and political bridges between Africans, and the wider Caribbean diaspora. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., an outspoken supporter of global liberation movements, including anti-colonial struggles in Africa, emphasizing that the destiny of the American Negro is tied to the destiny of Africa. Now, he didn't speak much of the diaspora too often, but when he did, he made his points. And towards the end of his life, before his assassination, he was beginning to see things from the perspective of what Malcolm X saw. Now, I don't have my book with me, but I've shown it before where it talked about the works of Dr. Jon H.E.N.R.Y and some of the conversations that he covered. And some of that had to do with how Malcolm and Martin had a mutual respect for each other, although in the beginning they did not see eye to eye on what the other was advocating. But towards the end of both their lives, they began to see things from the other's perspective. Just something to put out there if you're not familiar with it. Anyway, modern contemporary scholars, organized and activists such as Dr. Cornel West frequently challenge the exclusionary rhetoric of the FBA movement. They argue that prioritizing descent-based infighting over universal solidarity undermines collective political power. And I've said this before. Nothing kills me more, even when I listen to some of my Pan-African partners, or should I say my Pan fam, talk about how we need to consolidate and establish power. But the problem here is that we cannot consolidate power or even agree on how to do that when we can't even agree that we all come from the same continent. Both Dr. Jon H.E.N.R.Y and Dr. Joseph Benyakini have been known to state that we shouldn't be worrying so damn much. This is the mouth of Dr. Benyakini. We shouldn't be worrying so damn much about where the boat dropped us off. We need to be focusing on where the boat took us all from. And that is the tie that binds. But again, you're not going to get that from the FBA architecture. No, it doesn't work that way. Because again, the supposed lineage-based unique history that they speak of is not what it is at all. It's not unique. It is nothing more than a variance. Whether you were a descendant of slaves in America, in Haiti, in the Caribbean, in Brazil, if I take away where you grew up experiencing slavery, if I took that away, again, all I have now are people who have been oppressed and disenfranchised by a system that was put in place by European immigrants, a system that did not exist in America until brought. I recognize that. As I said before, it doesn't matter how unique you think you are. I can take anyone from the diaspora, switch them into each other's country, or put them someplace else, and a racist will still call you unique. Or depending on where you are, if you're an African, they'll call you captain, something along those lines. But still, there will be disparagement because a racist doesn't give a damn where you come from because you're all black and trash to them. Foundational Black American ideology would not exist without the existence of its African heritage. Foundational Black American ideology is a lineage-based designation for Black Americans who trace their history directly to U.S. chattel slavery. While its primary political focus is on American reparations history, the culture, resilience, and varied genealogy at the core of the movement inherently stem from Africa. Get some. Damn it. Can't get that highlight, but you see what I'm getting after, right? The genealogy, core of the movement, inherently stem from Africa. But you won't get anyone from FBA to agree to that. I mean, some of the most ridiculous, outright denial of reality and history that can be traced. No, that's not us. No, cuz I don't have anything to do with them big feet Africans. No, that ain't me, cuz I ain't no African booty scratch. All this type of nonsense that pops up. To include before Poppy jetted out of here. Again, they talk about loving to call folks tethered. Again, this is for people who have self-tethered themselves to the backs of African Americans who are responsible for the actual prominence that exists in written history when discussing African Americans and their achievements. How ridiculous, right? And of course, as I mentioned before, for those of you who are joining late, they have no concept and understand that the saltwater Africans, or as what they were called saltwater Africans, but these were pure blood Africans who were side by side from the beginning of slavery all the way up until the Civil War, were in the fields next to American-born slaves, working and enduring the same oppression. For those of you who have just joined, what I'm speaking about again are the native-born Africans who were brought over and who are standing on plantation ground since the beginning of slavery up until the very beginning of the Civil War. All throughout slavery, all 200 plus years, there was always native-born Africans who were standing in the fields working side by side with their descendants. But again, the FBA doesn't know about this because they don't research. They don't know the history. They know this nonsensical, fake-ass, performative, false premise declaration of lineage. That's all you get from it. Matter of fact, again, let me go back and give you guys some of the definitions that have already been shared here because we're getting ready to shut this down. So the first definition that I introduced here, performative false premise declaration, an authoritative statement or decree that is presented as reality by the speaker, despite being based on intentionally untrue or incorrect foundation, which Tariq Nasheed has based FBA on. It is designed to manipulate perception, set ground rules, or force compliance by treating a falsehood, for example, FBA ideology and lineage, as an established fact. It is all nonsense. All right, following that, we had vicarious misappropriation. A situation where an individual, entity, or group advances their own career, profit, or status by relying on and claiming credit for the recognized labor and intellectual contributions of peers, subordinates, or a known diaspora, meaning the African diaspora. FBA has no history, they have no legacy, they have no icons. I will continue saying that until it is drilled into people's heads. They are living vicariously through the accomplishments of African Americans with distinctions, who they themselves, the FBA speak of, have self-tethered themselves to the backs of. When we talk about stealing culture, yeah, we're talking about FBA culture vulturism, if that is a thing or a word. This action slowly erases the identities and contributions of subordinate workers, marginalized or established groups, such as the Black diaspora, allowing the appropriator, being FBA or ADOS, to build an unearned legacy. Let me know if you're understanding where I'm coming from, folks. Find the lie in my words. Now, the first two are definitions that I came up with. Now, this one has already been one that's been established. Pseudo-jingoism describes a fake or performative display of aggressive, ultra-nationalistic patriotism. It refers to individuals or groups who adopt a fiercely belligerent or pro-war stance to signal loyalty or virtue, but whose extreme views lack genuine conviction, real sacrifice, or ideological consistency. Tell me that doesn't sound like the whole architecture of FBA. Again, you don't have to agree with me, but I'm sure that if you can read and you have a level of comprehension that is at least high school diploma level, you know exactly what it is that I'm saying. So, getting back to this, the intersection of foundational Black American identity and its African roots is frequently discussed through a few key frameworks. The genealogical reality. Biologically and historically, FBA identity is impossible without its African heritage. God damn it. Let me go ahead and say this one more again. Biologically and historically, FBA identity is impossible without its African heritage. The culture and bloodlines originate from enslaved Africans trafficked to North America starting in the 17th century. The emphasis on lineage, FBA and ADOS movements distinguish their identity by focusing exclusively on those whose ancestors survived U.S. chattel slavery, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. This creates a specific political and economic focus rather than a cultural rejection of Africa. But again, here's that fabrication. All right, here's that manipulation. I'll take a little bit of this, I'll take a little bit of this, then I'll focus just on this part. I'll focus on everything right here that will give me a sense of legitimacy. But folks, we just had this conversation, did we not? Here, let me provide everything here that we've just discussed. All right, there's jingoism, there's vicarious misappropriation, and then of course, here's the performance base. All right, we've got all three of them right here, all three. All right, so tell me, folks, again, we have just read these definitions. Or should I say, I've read them, you listen to it. So again, this whole paragraph right here is absolute trash of trying to create a lineage. And that's what they tried to do. We'll just take this piece out, but I'll take this, I'll pick up from here, I'll add this. Here we go, we smash this sandwich together. All right, here's my lineage. Here's what I stand for. Oh, well, here's someone I haven't seen in a while. What's going on, Jason? I'm telling you, man, you need to get up here with me at some point in time. I can't be the only one putting this out here. All I can do is stay true to the game, but I need someone else and others likewise to make sure that this information gets known. But nonetheless, man, good to see you here. So yes, FBA, as Jason just said, is fraudulent in every sense of the word. Salute. Yo, man, I'm going to give you a shout once I get off the horn here if you got a minute, all right? So if you're around, go ahead. You know you see me. Pick up the phone. So again, Pan-African nativist perspectives. Critics and Pan-African scholars argue that attempting to separate the FBA identity from the broader African diaspora can fuel division. What do you mean can fuel? It already has. As Poppy Blanco said earlier, this is predominantly why we have this nonsense called tethers. Or if you listen to Dennis Sperling, oh, look at these tethers over here, these killer tethers. He is probably the next person behind Tariq Nasheed who is spreading this false doctrine, is what I'll call it. Spreading all this lies, spreading this nonsense. As I said before, FBA has no history. They have no legacy. They have no icons. And if they do have a history, it's history that they've appropriated by self-tethering themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinctions who are actually responsible for the prominence known of African Americans in American history. Put a 1 in the comments if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Holla back. So getting back to what we're saying here, they emphasize that African traditions, folklore, and survival tactics heavily influence the foundational culture of Black Americans, not FBA, but of Black Americans as a whole. Conversely, FBA advocates maintain that the unique socio-political history of American freedmen requires its own distinct classification to address systemic inequities and historical atrocities. The hell are you talking about? Again, the freedmen have nothing to do with foundational Black Americans because no one in the course of history ever identified as FBA. FBA only became a thing in the last 10, 20, let's say, I'll be generous, 40 years. Up until that, the American freedmen were considered African Americans. All right, or as I will say, Americans or African Americans with distinctions. Freedmen, those Blacks who have been freed from slavery. So again, this is that vicarious misappropriation that I'm speaking of. Let me go ahead and read that one more time. Let me read this again first. Conversely, FBA advocates maintain that the unique socio-political history of American freedmen requires its own distinct classification to address systemic inequities and historical atrocities. The perfect definition of vicarious misappropriation. I got to do it one more again, folks. I need you folks to take this back to the block with you. Again, vicarious misappropriation, a situation where an individual, entity, or group advances their own career, proper status by relying on and claiming credit for the recognized labor and intellectual contribution of peers, subordinates, or a known diaspora. The action slowly erases the identities and contributions of subordinate workers, marginalized or established groups, allowing the appropriator to build an unearned legacy. Who are you, FBA, to try and say that someone deserves their own place in history when you are not an advocate for the freedmen who were descendants of enslaved Africans? All right, picking and choosing from the buffet. Knock that mess off, all right? Yeah, one more. Got to do it. Or should I say, I want to do it. Performative false premise declaration. An authoritative statement or decree that is presented as reality, which we just saw, wanting to say that the freedmen need to have their own distinct box to check for the most part. An authoritative statement or decree. Again, this is performative false premise declaration. An authoritative statement or decree that is presented as reality by the speaker despite being based on an intentionally untrue or incorrect foundation. It is designed to manipulate perception, set ground rules, or force compliance by treating a falsehood, FBA ideology and lineage, as an established fact. All right, so stop letting these FBA ignorants speak for us. You gotta stop this. And finally, as has been mentioned throughout the show here, but we're going to end on this note because this is a show that I'm trying to get together. I'm looking to hopefully get someone or a group of people from Africatown to have a discussion with me either in a pre-recorded session or a live showing. Now, once I'm able to do this, I'll let everybody know. The direct descendants from the last slave ship to America, the Clotilda, who started Africatown in Alabama, are entitled to reparations as other slave descendants. And this is what I got back. Now, this was just something that I proposed just throughout there. Descendants of the Clotilda face a unique situation. Because the ship's 1860 voyage was illegal and well documented, many descendants possess a paper trail directly linking them to their trafficked ancestors. What we got? Lots of these FBAs don't realize they have been bamboozled by Russian troll farms. Damn straight. This started in 2015, 16, and has always been the case. Vladimir knew exactly how to pick the nerve, pretty much, and for lack of a better expression, the heartstrings of certain groups in America to cause strife and division. But more so than that, he was only aiding it. He wasn't as you and I both know, he wasn't the original facilitator of this. All he had to do was go back and give a little push here and there on things that were just at the surface level. But with enough pushing and prodding and ignorance to be shown, it all comes out in the wash. But as I said, when we look at the folks in Africatown, they are direct descendants. They have a direct paper trail, all right? A direct paper trail. This makes it one of the most clearly traceable cases of slavery in U.S. history. And now, advocates and legal scholars highlight the Clotilda case for the following reasons. Identifiable perpetrators and victims. The voyage was funded by Mobile, Alabama businessman Timothy Meehan, whose descendants still hold significant real estate and timber assets in the area. Now think about this, folks. You have grown up in a town your entire life amongst people who are direct descendants of pure-born Africans who were docked in Mobile, Alabama. You've got the family who is responsible for paying to get these people to come here as workers, pretty much as slaves. And now you have those folks still in the town who've got generational wealth. But the same people who were brought here to be subservient are living in lower and less than amenable standards. I'm using that right, but there is a show on Netflix, I believe it's called Descendants, and it addresses directly the people that I'm talking about, the descendants from the Clotilda and possibly not the Wanderer, that was in Georgia, but the descendants of the Clotilda. And the name of the show on Netflix, if it's still there, is called Descendants. I know I'm going to be checking it out before the weekend's over my damn self. The voyage, again, let me start over. The voyage was funded by Mobile, Alabama businessman Timothy Meehan, whose descendants still hold significant real estate and timber assets in the area. In contrast, the formerly enslaved people were freed with nothing and emerged into poverty. Isn't that always the case? People ask the question, how is it that African Americans are so far behind when it comes to generational wealth? Because it was never intended to be shared with us, because we were always viewed as being the help. There have been land deals in America that were never fully made known to African Americans, that people of European descent, or white folks, as most people call them, they're black folks and they're white folks, but the white folks got access to all of the information and knowledge, because who was actually running the government? Remember, there was not a lot of blacks who were part of the government after Reconstruction ended. Now remember, between 1866 and 1877, we're talking about 11 years of prominence, where you had blacks or formerly enslaved who had become doctors, who had become teachers, who had been lawyers, who had become ingrained into politics. And as soon as Reconstruction was over and Jim Crow started, were pushed out of any area of prominence. Anything that was influential or would have given advantage for formerly enslaved to have a place in government next to their white counterparts. Of course, we know that Jim Crow was not having that. So as a result, That is why you have such a such a disparity when we talk about generational wealth. It was never going to be a part of the Black community. Now, these are uncomfortable truths. This is not me looking to pick a fight. This is me stating fact. So do with it as you may. The case for reparations. Unlike general systemic reparations, the Clotilda descendants have an explicit case for localized reparations. Proposed forms of restitution include direct financial compensation for the Meir family, community revitalization, or land transfers to rebuild historic Africatown. The current status. While there is no official government-mandated reparations program for slave descendants on a federal level, Clotilda Descendants Association leaders and the Meir family have engaged in dialogues about reconciliation. And as I said here, the story and the descendants' ongoing fight for justice are featured in the Netflix documentary Descendants. All right, so if we were actually going to talk about reparations, folks, I would say first and foremost right now, the clearest case will be the inhabitants of Africatown. Without a doubt, that is or should be a slam dunk case for reparations. FBA, you're done, all right? You got nothing left to stand on here. Nothing, but of course, you will. Not a lot of you will see this. Majority of them won't. But for anybody who has seen what I presented here in almost, let's call it 2 hours, recognize that I don't bring lies. I bring facts, right? Facts don't choose sides. People do. So let me go ahead and give a shout out to Poppy Blanco, who was here early, and also thanks, Jason, for jumping in here. I know this is going kind of at the back end, but I appreciate any type of viewing I get. If you can, make sure other people know about this as well. So what's the takeaway from this? Understand that FBA has no claims for reparations, and I've given you enough reason to see why. They have no history. They have no legacy. They have no icons unless they self-tether, which they have themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinction. That's all they've done. They're living vicariously through actions that have already been completed while trying to create for themselves a legacy off the backs of others. That's all I've got, folks, that I can put in here. So as I said, I appreciate you for stopping in. I appreciate those who will hopefully take this message out and let people know about what we've got going on over here. But last but not least, I'll go ahead and make it known. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what I've got going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. I'll see everybody next time out. Peace.